Now it looks like it's going. All right. Well, welcome everyone to our hangout with Thaddeus Moore. Welcome, Thaddeus. Thaddeus is the chief mastering engineer for Liquid Mastering, has over 17 years of experience in many fields of audio engineering, including, of course, mastering. But we hope to pick his brain on basically any topic related to home recording, audio recording, especially music recording, tracking, mixing, and mastering. So welcome, Thaddeus.
Thanks for having me.
We are honored to be able to have this interview with you. Um, we have people who are asking all the time just general questions. What was the number one thing that you would recommend I do? How do I get into recording? And I have some questions that people have sent me already, queued up along those lines. But if we could start out with just kind of an overarching, we talked earlier about some advice that you feel doesn't get out there often enough. Can you fill us in on what some of that is?
Well, when it's coming to your own music, the best thing that you can do is focus on content and space, as far as writing your compositions. There's no better gear for a song than a good song, a well-arranged song. The way that parts fit together makes the song work. And we all have a tendency, once you get into this engineering field, to get super gear focused. And there's some great gear, and I use a lot of really expensive, fun toys to do my thing. But really, when it comes right down to it, if the song is well built, it's easy. So it's all about the songwriting. So, but as far as like how to maintain your files, if you're working at home alone, it really depends on what system, what architecture. If you're in Mac or PC, there's slightly different ways that you have to maintain your files. So I'm not sure what would be the best for your viewers, what the people that are into what you're doing are asking, but file management is a huge issue for people. One of the things that I deal with the most now from people who are working either by themselves or with a friend who's engineering their work in like a home studio situation, which is pretty common. There's so many different formats of files, and there's so many different ways that you can trade files over the internet, and keeping track of that is a really important task. It's boring for a lot of people. They don't want to think about it, but if you want to be able to do a remix 10 years from now on a song of yours, paying attention to that now is the most important thing you can do. Making sure that all of your source files are contiguous, meaning in whatever DAW you're working in. I'm assuming most people are working digitally. If you're working on analog, great, but you already know what to do. But with digital files, if you're punching in different parts of the song, you've got like verse 1, chorus 1, you've got these different sections of audio possibly in the same track. Let's say it's a vocal. In order to maintain that integrity of where those samples are placed throughout your song, you need to do what's normally referred to as a consolidation on that file at the end. Usually it's at the final, and that's where I deal with most of this stuff, is at the very end of somebody's production and how they're getting their files maximized for what they're going to send it off to do. It doesn't really have to do with mastering, because I don't really see the individual tracks like that. I just get a mixed down WAV file usually. But it is a really important thing for people to do, is to make sure that you have a consolidated, and each program calls it something different. In Performer, it's called Merge Bytes. In Pro Tools, it's called Consolidate Regions. In Logic, it's called Bounce in Place. So you have to do research about your particular DAW and what it calls that function. But
They call it glue in Reaper, glue items.
Right, glue and Reaper, right. And I'm going to actually put up a page about this on my site soon, but because I really feel like, even though I don't have much to do with it, I think it's a really important thing for people to do, because then from now on, you're not locked to whatever DAW you originally recorded it in. I mean, for example, I have files sometimes come to me from 10, almost 15 years ago, people working on early versions of Pro Tools, and they can't even open them because
Hmm.
that version of Pro Tools doesn't exist anymore. So they have all these tiny little punch point pieces that they have to try to piece a song together. And if what you have is a consolidated region or glue or whatever it's called, then you just need to make sure they all have the same 0 point in time, and that way you can drag them into any DAW in the future. Going forward from here on, it'll always be a standard. Doesn't matter if it's Mac, PC, or other. It will be able to line up those tracks, and all of your song will be built the way that it was originally intended. So that's super important, and I highly recommend bouncing everything at 24-bit or better, at 44.1 or better, and also making sure to use one of the more common file types. The two that are really hanging on now are WAV, everybody knows that. AIF is another pretty common format. Sound Designer 2 or SD2, they've kind of died away. That was the original before Pro Tools came along. But they're all pretty interchangeable at this point. But you definitely don't want to convert all your source material into some lossless format like MP3 or AAC, because, and we should talk about that at some point. But that's all I wanted to say on that. We can go on and get to some of the other questions that you people have asking here. So,
No, that's great advice, absolutely.
yeah.
Because yeah, I work. In fact, one of the courses we have at Homebrew Audio is the DAW that I use and that I teach is Reaper,
Oh, cool.
and they've got two different procedures you can do with a song. You can save stems for a complete song, which will do what you say and will glue everything in place, and each track then will be its own contiguous thing, and it will come out as a zip file of track 1, track 2, track 3, track 4, or whatever you named each track. But then there's an export as project as well, which will be it will be readable across all formats. So
Right.
that's another way to send files. But as a mastering person, you usually just receive the wave, right?
I receive the final, usually a 2-track if you're just working in stereo mixdowns, a left and right wave file. And I really like to see 24-bit or better. Even if you're working at 16-bit in your DAW, it's still a good idea to bounce your final mix out at the 24-bit. But you got to make sure you do that native, and that you're not bouncing 16-bit and then upsampling to 24, because that gets you nothing. Once you go down in bit reduction, you're pretty much stuck at that level. I use a lot of analog processing in my mastering, so I'll go out and I'll hit some analog gear and then come back in. Sometimes I need to do that with some of the lower quality stuff just to get things to sound a little bit more alive. But it really depends. Every song is different. But if you stay at the highest quality, you have a better chance of ending up even better. You know, it's like another mastering engineer I like uses the term like, I can move a mix up a letter grade. So if you have a C plus mix, I can give you a B minus. You know, like, I can work up if you give me something to work from. If you've got an F mix, it's probably going to turn out to be a D master. But you know, I'll do my best. And I usually try to give people feedback on their mix before I do my thing. If I think something's really not gelled together and they have the ability to go back to the mix stage and fix it, I always tell people that up front rather than trying to fight through it and ending up taking up their time for nothing.
Well, I would like, if you don't mind, to start out with a few questions on the tracking and mixing stage
Okay.
for some of the folks, and then we'll get into the questions on mastering. First of all, just a quick opinion. Do you think people can produce professional sounding recordings in home studios in 2014?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not sure what professional means anymore. It's up to the listener whether they like it. I mean, I've heard some really lo-fi, beautiful sounding music that it fit the mode of what they were trying to say as an artist. So from my point of view, there's always been professional level recording at home ever since recording came out. One of the first multi-track recordings was done by Les Paul and his wife on
Oh,
their
Mary Ford, yes.
on their home recordings just in their basement. So there's always been the ability to make professional recordings at home. Right now is a particularly good time to get into the digital recording side of things because it's finally starting to sound really good. I mean, I've heard things people have done on their iPad that sounded awesome. I mean, literally awesome. And that's crazy. I mean, it's amazing, beautiful. It's a great time to be in the music world because of that. Music business is having some hard times with it, but music is very healthy.
Yeah. Well, I always try to tell people that it's like you said earlier, less about the gear and more about sort of what you do with it.
Yeah, it's all about the song, and it's about the composition, and it's about the voice. I mean, not necessarily the human vocal, but it's about what's trying to be said in the music. It's why music matters so much to so many people because of how much it can speak directly to your subconscious being. So I mean, none of the gear that I use to do my thing is going to change that. What I can change is how something's going to sound on multiple different speaker systems, on different kinds of headphones, and try to help things congeal a little bit more. Maybe have a little bit more punch, dynamic range, whatever the song is lacking. I can do a lot of really fun stuff in the mastering stage, but really if the song's not a good song, it doesn't matter. There's only so much you can polish a turd,
Yeah.
Still a turd. So just make the best music you can, and we will all thank you for it. All of us music heads, we're all in this together. We all love music for the very reasons we're talking about.
Well, along those lines, I had a discussion with somebody at our release concert who is a music manager for a radio station who said there are a lot of people in our group. We have this sort of a niche that do recordings, but they don't sound professional, and yours do. And what is the difference? And I don't know how to answer her. I'm trying to come up with ways.
Well,
What would be your take on that? What would be sort of the top 3 things that amateurs do wrong when recording and mixing?
I think there's a lot of bass management issues. A lot of the things that I hear people who don't have the experience in recording as much don't know how to control the low end of the mix, and it ends up dominating a lot of the time and sounding really woofy and harsh. And on the other end of the spectrum, people who don't know how to place a mic well just end up getting all this other room ambience or something in their recording that's making it sound muddy and not clear. There's a lot to do with mic technique, choosing the right microphone and placing it in the right position, because microphones are like a lot of people talk about microphones as being directional because every microphone has a polar pattern. And I don't know if you've talked about that yet, but the
Yes.
microphone that you're using right now, that microphone has a switchable polar pattern from
Right.
the Omni, Figure 8, or Cardioid, which is mostly one-sided, and each one of those has their benefits for different kinds of uses. But not only are microphones directional, what direction they're going to pick up sound sources from, they're also a dropper. They're like taking a little sample dropper of that little tiny cubic portion of air that the capsule sits in. So if you point a microphone at your sound source and then move that microphone closer or further away, you will hear a huge difference in frequency spread because different frequencies develop differently over space. So you're going to have a different sonic characteristic depending on how far away or close your microphone is to its sound source. And sometimes it's great to get a nice far away, warm, luscious room sound, and sometimes it's nice to be just right up in the grill, just getting the very essence of what that thing is. Sometimes it's nice to use the both. I don't know how you guys tracked. I don't know how the people they're saying didn't sound professional track, but a lot of the time it has a lot to do with song composition. I mean, really, for example, I've been running a studio as well as mastering for almost 18 years. It's amazing the difference in two bands. For example, I had the exact same drum kit. It was my studio kit. It was a really nice, well-tuned, really nice 5-piece Yamaha custom kit. First day, set up all the mics, got it sounding really good. The drummer really knew what they were doing. The band sounded awesome. We left it set up and used the same exact setup, left all the mic preamps on, same settings, came in the next day with a different drummer, and it sounded terrible. And nothing we could do was fixing it, because there's a lot to be said about technique. And I'm just talking about drums right there, but every instrument, proper tuning, proper placement of notes with other people who are playing in the band, I mean, that is huge. And it's hard to even put a qualification on it, like, oh, that song sounds professional, probably because you guys are just, I mean, you're just a tighter group. You're a tighter band, and your music comes across that way, more so than any recording technique, you know what I mean? It's hard to say, and until I hear back and forth. If I had some examples, I could probably tell you what might have been able to be done better in certain circumstances, but there's too many variables. There's too many variables, so...
The two things that I was able to, I think, put my finger on, which one of them tracks exactly with what you're talking about. A lot of us are recording one-man band kind of things. I do a lot of, I've been in rock bands, but right now I'm doing mostly acoustic stuff. So I'm layering my own tracks and playing acoustic guitar, and then I'll play the bass, and then I'll add different kinds of drums, some sampled drums and some hand drums or something later, and then add some other instruments, and then add a bunch of harmonies because I love doing that. But I am
everything you just said. You didn't talk about gear at all just now. It was all about the song and the way that you put it together.
Yeah.
So that's my opinion, is that what makes something sound more professional is the songwriting.
And I had one example of one of the recordings I was listening to that she had put in that other category, that some of the songs were extremely good on as compositions, but the person doesn't have, what's the way to put it? I'm probably a little too far into the details. I'm just psycho about it, and my wife has to drag me kicking and screaming away from the computer, going, "No, it doesn't need to be 3 microseconds more correct, in sync with the bass," that kind of thing. But if I hear anything out of sync with anything else, it makes me crazy, and I'll go in and slice one beat and drag it left or right, a couple of literally microseconds to get it to where it's more correct. And what I heard in this other recording was that they didn't. Not only did they not, drag it one way or the other, they didn't seem to pay attention at all. There was a drum track in the background that didn't track and didn't sync with the guitars, and it was slipping and sliding forward and back, ahead of the beat, behind the beat, and other instruments as well. That drove me nuts.
I mean, there are some bands that have made a thing out of that. That are able to attract a certain group of people because of how discordant or noisy or erratic or whatever it is that they're doing. But usually that's the point. It's not a band that's trying to be one way and failing and just saying, "Oh, well, whatever." It's so that's. That's professionalism. Is taking it seriously, making sure that you have good takes of the players. I mean, I've heard some great recordings done with one microphone, like an SM57 hanging above the drums in a room with a band that was ridiculously tight at what they did, that sounded better than some full productions with multi-track and all these overdubs and everything, because the source tracks weren't built right, So, yeah.
Exactly so. The other thing, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
You answered your own question. It's all about professionalism.
That's pretty scary stuff. I should do this more often so that I can gain more knowledge. Let's see. I would ask. You said we were going to talk a little bit about gear. It doesn't matter that much about gear, but there are a lot of people who are asking about recording. I want to get into it, but I don't know what to do, and I don't have a large budget. So,
Okay.
what would your advice be for someone like that?
Um, It really depends on what their budget is and what they're trying to achieve. If they're an EDM artist and they're just trying to make really fun beats of whatever kind, it's really easy nowadays to just get different pieces of software, free stuff, Mac or PC, some even just right in the web that you can start building sequencing right there. You don't have to spend much at all. But if you're wanting to do live tracking of any kind, the most important thing is your microphone. That hands down, it's the point at which you're capturing what's the essence of what it is you're trying to record. So if you're going to spend any money, spend it on a good microphone. But with digital recorders, you also have to have an interface, and unfortunately, there's a huge variance in quality difference in different kinds of converters. And what I mean by a converter, usually it's, for a home record, it's just going to be a standalone box that maybe has 2 mic preamps in it and analog to digital converters, and then maybe a headphone out with some digital to analog converters back the other way. Maybe it's USB or FireWire or Thunderbolt now. Those are where I would spend the most money. Spend money on something like a good microphone, and spend money on something like a good microphone preamp and converter setup, and that's you're off and running, because software is basically free now. I mean, you can get just about any kind of software you want, try it out, and I mean, you love Reaper, and what is it, $60 or something?
It's $60. Yeah.
Dollars, just pay them. They're great at what they do. They're really responsive. They have a great forum of people that love that software. It's written by just a couple of guys who are just doing it because they love it. That's the kind of thing I love. It's great. Just get a good mic, get a good mic preamp setup, and get Reaper. That's it doesn't matter. The DAW does not matter. It's more about what you feel comfortable with, what works well, isn't glitchy and dropping files and crashing all the time. It's more about what you can really use. It doesn't matter what it is. I mean, I teach classes on audio engineering, and that's one of the things people ask me all the time, what's a better DAW? And if all you're trying to do is get ideas down and you have a Mac, GarageBand is free. It comes with it, and it's just right there, like ready to go. And it's not a great program by any means, but it's definitely not the worst thing I've ever seen. You can write songs in it. You can do really fast edits. It's missing a lot of basic features, in my opinion, like crossfades. I don't know why they don't have that in there, but so anyway, I mean, as far as gear is concerned, really the microphone is where to go. It's where to look. And the microphone that you're using is one of my biggest recommendations, because it is such a jack of all trades. It's got a really great frequency response. It's got really directional polar patterns. I love its figure 8. I use it on figure 8 a lot when I'm tracking. I have a lot of mics. I've got a lot of different microphones. But if somebody was on a low budget, that's one of the best mics you can buy for the money. Best bang for your buck. So.
And for those who wonder, this is the mic he's talking about, which is a Rode, R-O-D-E, NT2A. This is multi-pattern. They also make an NT1A. It doesn't have the same capsule as the NT2A, and it's a cardioid only, but it's less expensive.
I prefer that NT2A over the NT1A, but each their own. If you like it better, by all means. I had the chance once to work with a $6,000 beautiful tube mic that everybody around me was like talking about for weeks. I couldn't get anything out of it that I enjoyed. It was just amazing. So it really doesn't matter. As long as you are getting what you want out of it, it's a good microphone.
Awesome. Yeah, people talk about, like, hey, well, Jeff Lynne uses an SM57 on his voice in the studio or whatever. It's
there you go.
Yeah, so it's what sounds better, what sounds good on. What is your opinion on on how far USB mics have come?
I really haven't had much experience with the USB mics, but there's a lot of them out there, so I would imagine that two front runners in that competition are probably Rode, because they've been doing it for one of the longest, and Blue. I would imagine both of theirs have great different settings. I don't know if any of them are great mics. I don't know about their noise floor characteristics. And by noise floor, I mean how much hiss you have in the background. If you start to bring the gain up, does it start to sound really like top heavy? Is there anything really know anything about those USB mics? Unfortunately, I've never used any. But there's a great website. If you guys haven't talked about it, I'm sorry, I don't know if you haven't or not, but it's called recordinghacks.com, and those guys are amazing at testing all sorts of different microphones, and they have ratings on there. They have a really good community forum for questions. They've reviewed just about every microphone ever made. It's called recordinghacks.com. Great guys. So.
Oh, that's awesome. I'm going to try here and see if it works for those who are watching. Let's see. I don't know from the website. That's just http://recordinghacks.com. I don't know if that's going to come through or not for folks. Oh, wow. First thing that came through is IOX Boom iPad Mounting System Review, and it's got a picture of 5 different mics. So
there you go.
There we go. Yeah, I just did I didn't do a hands-on because I don't have it yet, but Rode just came out with the Rode NT-USB microphone. Right. I would love to get my hands on, but you're right about the hiss, that high level or the high-end noise that I have not yet heard a USB mic that doesn't have that. So that'll be a good breakthrough if they can fix that.
Well, there's problems there, and I don't want to get too down the rabbit hole on that, but there's problems with the basic premise of USB as a power supply for a microphone, because the type of switching power supplies that are in computers that supply the power line for USB is a noisy sort of power. It's going to introduce a lot of harmonically relative distortion into the line. So I don't know how they have it filtered on the back end, but I would imagine USB is always going to have a worse noise floor than something else. So just think about that. I mean, for most things, people who are recording podcasts and stuff like that, it's probably fine. If you're just using it to get ideas down, whatever. But if you're trying to make something that stands the test of time, I would recommend against it.
Good advice.
So.
Well, moving on from the gear on the tracking end, what would be your advice on the same person, the artist, the person who is recording their own music, doing the tracking and then the mixing and then the mastering themselves?
I mean, this is going to sound incredibly self-serving. I'm not trying to sell my own services here. I am saying this as an engineer as well who's made the mistake of trying to master his own mixes. I highly recommend that you go to someone else for the final mastering. Somebody you trust, somebody that you know is going to be a competent mastering engineer. They could be another studio in town or something like that. They could be somebody that you find online that you like their catalog. But having another set of ears on the final take of what you've got is, I can't even put a price sticker on it. It's invaluable as feedback. And every time I've had a really lucky time. I've got to work with some amazing mastering engineers that have done some really top level work, and the feedback that those guys had given me at the time was foundationally just a sea change in my attitude towards what I was doing. It really helped give me feedback for the next recordings that I was doing. And my own music, I've been in a bunch of bands and recorded and mixed and tried to master it as well, so I'm familiar with that, and I just recommend against it. Recording and mixing, that you can do a lot in that, because the lines of that have started to blur because working in the mix while they're recording new things. So that can kind of go hand in hand. And then once you're doing a real mix on it, it's nice to play that on as many different playback systems as you possibly can. Play it on a laptop speaker. Play it in headphones that go in your ear holes. Play it on over-the-ear headphones. Play it in somebody's crappy old Chevy. Just hear what it sounds like on as many different speaker systems as possible, because that's going to give you some real-world feedback on how your mix is translated. And that's the biggest hurdle to jump over, is how is your mix translating to the outside world. And that biggest difference between people that are doing this just for the fun of it and people who are trying to release art and go on tour and make a living doing the music thing is that they really care enough to check all that stuff. So I mean, it really depends on your means to it. There's no right answer. It's just I would recommend getting some outside opinion and listening yourself before you even go to that outside opinion on as many different systems as possible, because there's so many variables in whatever system you've got. If you're working in headphones, if you're working on some little speakers on a desk in your living room, whatever it is that you're doing, you're only hearing through the lens of what those transducers are producing for you. So if you're mixing without a subwoofer, for example, you might be missing a whole 2 octaves of content below 80 hertz that's just not there for you to be able to notice what's happening down there in your really low end. And going to systems that have that can really show you, like, whoa, my low end is way out of control, or where did it go? There's no low end there. So and mid-range issues. I mean, mid-range is where most of music happens. So really paying attention to, everybody's got a different, bracket of what they consider mid-range, but I consider anything between like 350 up to about 6K is like your mid-range. The human hearing spectrum, I don't know if you've ever talked about that, but our ears are the most sensitive around 1 kilohertz. So everything around that, between 1 and 6 kilohertz, is the intelligibility factor of all music. So if you've got problems in that range, that's the first thing to address.
The baby cry. That's where babies cry. Yeah, we're so sensitive to it there.
It's which came first, the babies cry there. We're sensitive to it because they cry there. Who knows? But that's where the important stuff's happening, and a lot of the main emotional part of music happens in that section. I mean, you can do some really fun stuff down in the low end, and you can do some really sparkly, beautiful stuff in the high end, but if that mid-range isn't gluing together, your chances of you emotionally impacting your listener is difficult. You've added more hurdles to your game. So I don't know if that counts.
No, that's awesome. In fact, I'm going to actually move into a mastering question now to sort of jump off of that. If somebody sends you the mixed down, because for those of you who may not know this, the mastering engineer typically receives an already mixed down stereo file, so they can't go in and just lower specific sounds on tracks like you can when you're mixing. So if somebody sends you a track as a master, and they've got all kinds of stuff stepping on each other in the mid-range, masking each other, what can you do at that point when you've only got the stereo file to work with?
It is very interesting. I've been surprised at some of the cool things I could do, even when I wish I could have gone back to the mix stage and had them fix it. It's a combination of different things. Using EQ, lots of different types of EQ to pull out or abolish different frequencies that are not working well together. Dynamics control, either transient, making sure things in the mid-range that are really bonky, sticking out, stay a little bit more mellow. Multi-band compression can really help doing. I mean, there's so many great tools now. It's unbelievable. There's some really amazing digital tools that I recommend to a lot of people. They're not very well known, but they make some of the pure digital plugins that aren't trying to emulate an analog classic.
Hmm.
Um, you guys write code that is exactly what should be there for the digital world, called Fab Filter. I don't know if you guys have experienced them. I think they're a Swedish company. Check them out. They make some of the coolest. It's FAB Filter, Fab Filter, and they make stuff that is just mind-bogglingly cool and easy to use, beautiful to look at. I use a lot of their stuff for all sorts of crazy different reasons. I don't know. There's just so many great tools now. I use a lot of analog things. I use a lot of tube gear. Tubes impart this really neat kind of smoothing distortion. It's really hard to explain. Once you get to know tube gear long enough, you'll start to hear it, and you'll be like, "Oh, that's what I want. That right there." But tubes really do things. Um, Distortion. I mean, I know it sounds weird because when people think of distortion, they think of like a guitar pedal or something going, "Wah," but creative use of harmonically relative distortion. It can really smooth things out, and there's a whole world of that out there. And I don't want to drop a bomb on your viewers, but I mean, just playing around with different kinds of distortion, different type of harmonic distortions like triode and pentode distortions that happen in tubes. Each one imparts different kinds of harmonic overtones, and I mean, there's so many great things that you can do. But I mean, that's on my side of the fence. In the mastering world, I deal with a lot of different kinds of things. Depending on what people are handing to me, I'll reach for different tools. It's kind of like it's analogy to doing fine woodworking. Somebody who's building a cabinet or something, and then the mastering engineer is the one who comes through and smooths out the little divots and cracks and crevices and just polishes everything and makes it as tight as it can look, sort of thing. So it depends. Whatever people are handing me, I'll do different treatments. There's no, I don't think I've ever done the exact same thing on two songs. So, I mean, I might approach, but every song is asking for some different kind of thing to make it sound the best that it can sound. And that's really what mastering is all about, is making the song sound as good as it can on as many different kinds of playback systems as it'll ever be heard on. And it's a pretty amazing feat to try to think about when you're doing something, is be like, what is this going to sound like when they're listening to it on the International Space Station or whatever. So anyway,
Yeah, I always take pre-mastering, my own sort of, I call them test mixes, but just take them into the iPod and onto a CD and listen to them in the car, downstairs on the big consumer speakers, in, like you said, in the headphones, in the earbuds, and everything else. And if it passes all of those tests, and I don't have any notes, then I let my wife listen. That came out wrong. I have my wife listen. She's also a musician, and she picked something up on one of our songs this last time that I had not heard, and it was a little click that was happening in the chorus, and she's.
I don't know if you can see me, but I've lost your feed. Are you there? Can you hear me? I may have lost you. Okay.
I think we're back.
All
I
right. We did
looks
it.
like it looked lost my internet connection somehow. That is very, very frustrating. But I'm glad we got it back in less than a couple of minutes. That's very cool.
Right on.
Right. What was I saying? I was going to ask you a question. Loudness. Yes.
Okay.
Um, I always was taught that RMS, root mean square, was the standard to use for measuring loudness and for comparing loudness. Has that changed?
Yes, as an industry-wide standard, yes. But it is the closest approximation for a meter. If you're talking about a meter graph showing you levels, it is the closest approximation to what our ears hear as loudness. But there's so many psychoacoustic things going on inside of our brain. It's a really interesting philosophical question when you dive down it. But in the last couple of years, the Audio Engineering Society, AES, has come out with a couple of different standards that have started to be adopted, specifically in the broadcast world, because they were having so many problems with different levels from one TV show to a commercial kind of thing. You guys have probably all seen it where you're watching a TV show and then you've got it up to a certain level to hear the dialogue of the show, and then a commercial comes on and it's just
Yes.
Sunday, Sunday, Sunday. Oh my God! So what they've done is they've established a new standard of it's a whole bunch of call letters, but it's 1773 dash whatever it is now, and really what it's talking about is based off of a peak maximum of 0 dB full scale, which all digital recording is based off of.
Hmm.
Using that loudness metering scale, the average broadcast now is set up to be operating at 23 dB below that. So that's your average level. So they're not going to allow much range around that anymore. But in the music world, there are no standards. That's part of the problem right now, is that everybody for the last 15 years has wanted, well, for the last 50 or 60 years has wanted the loudest record possible. And really, back in 2002 was when I really started to notice problems. I was going, what's happening here? It was everything just keeps getting pushed up, and then all of a sudden it's like this screen right here. The audio waveforms are
Yes.
to like get right up to it, and there's nowhere for them to go, and you lose dynamic punch, and you add all this ear fatigue because all those waveforms are being clipped almost, and that adds in all these non-pleasant distortion characteristics. So that's one of the things I talk to my clients about all the time is dynamic range. Let's leave some, because music is meant to be dynamic. There's no reason to be loud anymore. As a matter of fact, Bob Katz, who's a mastering engineer I respect a lot, he published a big article last year about how the loudness war is over because iTunes inadvertently set up this whole sound check system. I don't know if you've seen it in your iPod, but it just comes stock in every iPhone, iPod, Macintosh computer, and iTunes for Windows. If unless somebody goes in to change the settings, there's this little box called sound check on, and what it does is it goes through and it checks based off of a loudness variable, an algorithm that Apple set up to find the average level of each file that it's going to play back, so that if you put like Billie Holiday and the Cars and Janis Joplin and Jay-Z into the same playback playlist, it will keep them at a relatively consistent volume for you. So there's no reason to make your track that much louder than anything else, because most people are listening to music on things like iPods and iPhones now, and through streaming services like Spotify and iTunes Radio and Pandora. So they all have their own loudness checks that tries to make the songs closer to each other's value. And if you over compress your songs, it actually turns your song down more, and it makes your song sound smaller. So it's better to leave more dynamic range and allow your music to have loud sections and quiet sections and whatever it needs to deliver its emotional content. But as far as RMS, sorry to get so tangential, RMS is a good way to meter for loudness, but it's not going to tell you exactly what's going on as far as a human being is going to be able to understand that loudness. Because the way that our ears convert the frequencies hitting them into signals that our brain can interpret, and then how our brain interprets those signals, an amazing mystery box of all sorts of different sorts of things happening. And so to just have a loudness meter at all it's kind of like throwing a dart. You're getting close, you're saying, okay, I think I'm sort of like this loud. But really, it comes more down to dynamic range. Our ears are so much more sensitive to dynamic range. For example, in the human ear, there's lots of different theories out there, but one of the most recognized theories about the way that we hear is that we have 24 discrete jumps in doubling of volume that our ears can hear. So you double it once, double it again, double it again, double it again. We can do that 24 times. Our ears can hear like the smallest flies wings beating across the room, and you can stand next to a giant jet airplane and hear all the swirly craziness in that engine. And the level of difference in those pressure levels is gigantic. And a magnitude of 24 is what we can hear. But in pitch, in frequency, we can only hear 10 octaves, which are doubling of frequency. We've only got 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, and most people don't even have 20 kilohertz. So, I mean, we have a drastic amount of frequencies, but we have a whole lot of dynamic range. So let's leave a lot of dynamics. Our music will sound better with dynamics. So
when I sent in my master, I shouldn't use that word. When I sent in the final mixes to the mastering engineer this last go, one of my songs it was on a previously recorded compilation that wasn't mine. And so I did not have the original tracks. I only had that final already mastered version in with the rest of the songs. So I tried to leave everything I was using RMS to try to and leave a certain amount of room below. I don't remember how much I decided on, but leave enough headroom below 0 dB for there to be room to work with. And when I mentioned to the mastering engineer that this one song had already been previously mastered, I wanted him to take from that this doesn't need much in the way of dynamics. Just make it the same loudness as what everything else ends up being. And he took that to mean that all the other songs need to be brought down to the level of that one song. And when I got the master back, I was horrified and I was like, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god. And he said, hey, if you tell a mastering engineer that one of the songs on your collection has already been mastered, they're going to use that as the reference. And so that was a lesson learned.
I wouldn't take. I mean, that wouldn't be my approach.
Oh, good.
Engineers are people too, and all sound engineers are very opinionated, and we're all right. I just, when somebody brings me something like that, and if they say this track has already been mastered, I'll say, well, are you happy with the mastering job on that track? Do you want the other songs to feel more like this master? Or do you want me to do what I do, and that one just gets the same treatment, and they all end up sounding a little bit more like each other, or what? So I would try to clarify up front with you what you wanted from that mastered file, because just because something's been mastered doesn't mean it can't be treated again. I mean, as a matter of fact, the same song can be mastered, 10 times for different releases in a movie soundtrack and in a TV show and without vocals for a commercial or whatever. So the same song might be treated differently for a lot of different kinds of releases. So there's nothing wrong with remastering a track as long as you're starting with good source material. It really doesn't matter.
Okay. I am going to ask, I think, one more question. Our little break, unfortunately, we lost a little bit of time there, but then I'd like to hear if you wanted to talk about liquid mastering.
Oh, I love mastering. It's what I want to do when I grow up.
How does one make the leap? It's always, I've been reading Recording Magazine since it came out. In fact, it wasn't even called Recording Magazine back then. And there's always this sort of secrecy, this hush, this sort of sense of awe and mystery that surrounds mastering. And I always wondered, why? Is there a secret? Is there a secret handshake? Do you have to... do they have some secret tools that they don't want anyone else to know about, or is it just a matter of you really have to have hyper-developed ears, lots of experience, and if you can, maybe some formal training?
Yeah, I would say all of that. There's no secret handshake. I don't think I'm cool enough to know it anyway. But really what it comes down to is attention to detail. And mastering engineers are a special breed of people who are most of the time not happy with settling for anything less than the top 10% of what is capable, and sometimes the top 1% in some cases. Mastering equipment, it usually costs upwards of 4 to 10 times more than the same sort of thing that you'd get for a recording. Because of the fine point controls that are needed. One of the things that once I started getting into mastering more was being able to recall settings, and with a lot of recording gear, it's made to just go as things need to be done. You bring this level up, you turn this dial, and okay, that's great. That sounded good for that song. What are we doing now? We'll just change this around and make this next song sound good. But with mastering, you have to be able to recall settings. You have to be able to say, on this song, this processing was done, and then if somebody wants you to reprocess that with a different kind of approach, you can reset all of that to the same settings, which in the digital world, that's pretty simple now because automation lets you just take a snapshot of where everything is. But if you're working in analog equipment, the ability to have that snapshot recallability by having detented pots and things like that, it costs a lot more money. Plus, the R&D that goes into the back end of really good mastering equipment is far greater than that most people can afford to buy for recording and etc. So really what you're paying for when you're buying higher levels of gear is more people hours, man or woman, attention to what is going into making that signal sound good. Signal treatment and crossing the barrier into mastering can be an expensive prospect because you need to buy better gear, you need to have great speakers, you need to have a really nice tuned room, you need to have a room that does not impart too much gunk, because walls are just a constant problem. I mean, this room that I'm in right now is not, it's not the room that I prefer to work in. It's more of my editing. So every room is going to impart a certain kind of characteristic, and having a really, really nice flat response with not a whole lot of decay and not a whole lot of absorption, having a nice balance between absorption and reflection in a room, it's expensive as well. To build a good mastering room it's a whole big game. So, I mean, jumping into mastering, if you want to do it for real, you have to invest a lot of yourself, not just money, but time, learning how to do the kinds of things that are required for the different formats. For example, mastering for vinyl is a completely different process than mastering for CD or an online release. And you know, back in the day when tapes were in vogue and you'd have to put something to a tape, that would need its own processing. So really, it's all of those things. It takes years of experience to understand the finer points of all those different things, because EQ is EQ is EQ, but there, you know, depending on what you're doing at each stage, if you're EQing for a tracking thing, you're going to approach it one way. If you're EQing for a mixing thing, you're going to approach it another way. And then that same kind of EQ, it'll probably be a different box, but that same kind of EQ, what's doing boosting or cutting or shelving or tilting or whatever it is that you're doing, it's going to be for a very specific and different outcome. So the reasons behind each of those stages are very different. And it's hard to say, I can't not give away tricks, because the tricks that I do might not work for you. You know, each person who gets into the field has a different approach about what they think is going to get to the end goal. And there's a lot of similarities. When you get to a mastering engineer, we all do a very similar job of approaching the song, because we know when we hear a song, we go, okay, we know that this needs to happen and this needs to happen. And a lot of the equipment that we use is built for the same sort of purposes. So a lot of mastering engineers end up having a very similar kind of conversation about things, because it's like, oh, okay, I see what needs to happen there for that song to stand out, or you know what, there's just way too much 500 hertz on that verse. I just need to bring down that one frequency a little bit, and that's going to sound great. And this has been the biggest lesson for me. Really good mastering engineers know when to do nothing. Knowing when to do nothing is a big step in your achievement. You can be like, you know what, this song sounds really good. I'm going to leave it alone, and I'm going to let it be what it is, and then come back to it once I have everything else, and then maybe dynamically it needs to shift a little bit to better to fit to the whole record. But it really depends. If I'm mastering a single, if it's going to be on iTunes, or if it's going to be on a vinyl disc, if every approach is going to be different. So I can't really tell you like, oh, here's the secret to that. It's just, getting it to sound the best that it can for the output medium is the goal. Sorry if that's too long-winded, everybody.
No, there were a lot of awesome nuggets in that one.
So,
Yeah, that's great. Well, one last thing that I wanted to ask you about is if you had wanted to sort of plug what you're doing and Liquid Mastering.
oh yeah, I mean, check out what I have built on Liquid Mastering. There's a lot of different forms of music, and some of it needs updating. It's years old now, but it just gives you an idea of what my approach to mastering is. You can see a version side by side on my player of what file somebody gave to me to start with and what I ended up giving them back. And I love what I do. Every client that I work with, I try to work with until they're happy. Some people, you can't please them, but most of my clients are great, and I love their music, and I get into what they're doing, and I follow their career afterwards. And I've been lucky to meet some really amazing people through it, and I'm doing music from around the world. I love what I do. I want to do more. So, and let me check out your music. Send me some of what you're up to. I'd love to hear it.
And I put the link there. I don't know if it's showing up on yours. It should show up in the final broadcast there. But it's your last stop in great sounding recordings. Does that sound familiar?
Yep.
Yeah.
Liquidmastering.com.
And there it is on the screen there. And in case you missed it, it's simply liquidmastering.com. So if you are working on a project or you have a project coming up, I highly recommend that you send your product out for mastering. And yeah, contact Liquid Mastering and can you will you send people, like, if they send you a song and say, how much would it be to do one song so I can hear what you do, or is that just something?
Yeah, I mean, there's been times that I've worked out things with people to do a trial run to see if I'm the right fit, but also, I might be able to hear something and know that, I'm not going to be the person that's going to be able to help you, or, you might need to go back to the mix stage and adjust some things. But usually, I don't like doing work without having some sort of an established communication or understanding that we're going to move forward on something, because my time is valuable just like yours is, and I like having the respect of a mutual exchange. I respect your music, you respect my need to make a living, like that. So I'm willing to work with people on what they have, and I've done plenty of times checking people's music out and giving them feedback on how they could affect their mix better before it comes to the mastering stage. I'm happy to do that. But taking the time to do mastering, it's kind of a commitment. So it's hard to do too much of that on spec. It's an investment of time, energy, and a lot of focus. So it's hard to do that without having an established agreement with people that we're going to be able to move forward together on a project. And you know what I mean?
Yeah, I was going to say that itself is already better than what I experienced on my last project, because I could not. There was no relationship. There was no clarification of what I wanted. There was no give and take. It was just boom.
Should be a person who's giving you feedback, if you want it, on what you're doing from another person's point of view. And not to say that they're right, but they can at least give you a different point of view, so whether you take it and run with it, or you say, wow, that guy's an idiot, he doesn't know what he's talking about, just having another point of view gives you some way to think about your music that you've never thought about before. So I think that's hugely valuable. That's the way I approach it. Some mastering engineers like to completely be hidden, never talk to anybody ever, complete social recluses, and there's some value in that too, but that's just not who I am and how I work. So yeah.
That's fantastic. All right, that's pretty much all the time we have. This has been incredibly awesome, Thaddeus. I thank you so much.
Sure. Absolutely.
And,
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
oh, yeah, thank you. And this, for everybody else, will... I don't know how that break in the middle is going to affect the video on playback, but either way, I'll find a way to connect it together, and it'll be available, I think, on YouTube for people to watch later. And any parting words for us, Thaddeus?
Just make the best music you can, and please go research the difference between lossless and lossy audio codecs. Just remember those terms, lossless and lossy. We didn't get time to talk about it, but it's a really important thing, and everybody should learn about it.
Got it. I will make another note to myself to do a post on lossless versus lossy formats, so that'll help amplify your message. Well, all right. I will let you get back to your evening, and once again, I very much appreciate it, and hopefully we can maybe do some work together in the future with the next album.
That'd be great. I'd love to hear it.
All right. Well, thanks again, and I'm going to stop the broadcast now.
Okay.
See you later, everybody.